David, thank you. You have here standing before you an unashamed news junkie. I watch and I listen to all channels, and it's what I do, and it's how I keep in touch, I hope. Anyway, this morning is not about me. It is about the gentleman sitting to my right, former head of the Civil Service in Northern Ireland, Sir Nigel Hamilton. Do I have to call you Sir, Nigel?
Only in private.
Okay. Fine. Sir Nigel, head of the Civil Service. That was, I suppose, how most of the public will have known you. But before that, of course, there was a journey that got you there. But how did you feel as the head of the Civil Service in Northern Ireland?
At the time, when I was there from 2002 to 08, it was an immense privilege. Little did I ever realise when I was a young boy growing up in North Belfast and going to the Boys Model School, of which I'm immensely proud, that I would ever end up as head of the Civil Service. And especially at a time, in my case, when Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness came together as First and Deputy First Minister. So, as Tony Blair said in that understated way of his, I felt the hand of history on my shoulder. But it was an immense privilege and an opportunity, and also something, which I felt I was contributing to. To the benefit of NIPLC.
What did the hand of history feel like?
Well, it was amazing to think that these two individuals, given their background, given their history, had come together and were working together. And interestingly, what you saw publicly in terms of the Chuckle brothers was a reflection of what happened behind the scenes. They got on extremely well together. I would have to say, I personally believe that Ian Paisley's journey was influenced by his wife, and he brought that particular constituency. Martin McGuinness's journey was very much influenced, I know, by, for example, his love of Mandela, and he brought that particular constituency. And my job in the middle, someone used to ask me at the time, what is your job? And I said, it was simple, it was to make it work. And that actually was very important to do in terms of relationships.
But here were two men who had come from diametrically opposed ends of the spectrum. And I suppose it's not unfair to say at one point they must have hated each other.
Oh, they did. Well, there's no doubt. There's no doubt, when you look back at the vitriol and you back, in the 70s, 80s and early 90s, in terms of what they were saying with one another, there was no doubt that this was a remarkable transformation.
What changed?
And coming together.
What changed?
I think both of them, I'm convinced that on one hand, Ian Paisley wanted part of his legacy to have been Prime Minister / First Minister, and Martin McGuinness was absolutely convinced that at that point in the journey of the Republican movement, that violence would not pay. How can I put it simply? I put it this way, in my judgment, Paul, between the IRA and the British government, it was going to be a draw. And therefore, Martin McGuinness then believed that politics was the way forward. And I say, there's no doubt, as far as he was concerned, in terms of the broader history and the pattern of history, that he saw Mandela's journey as his journey. Because he said to me on a number of occasions, yes, this is part of my journey, moving from the background that he had into politics. Can I say one more thing about him?
Briefly.
He was an absolute pragmatist. He always, with Paisley, found solutions to things. And I just thought it was a great tragedy that he took ill as he did.
Now, here were two men who believed in God, who would say that they lived out their faith in God. But equally, you will know that there were people who could have seen Ian Paisley far enough, people on his own side, and people on Martin McGuinness's side who could have seen him far enough as well. And on the one hand, you've got Ian Paisley, who is a Protestant, a Christian, a reformist, and then on the other hand, you've got a guy who was born in, I think it was 1951. His middle name is Pacelli, which is the name of the Pope at that time. Where did they meet? Where did these two religious people meet in that sense?
Well, they met politically because they believed that the two extremes had to come together. In terms of faith, I'm convinced that each had a journey, and each over a period of time began to realise that the other wasn't quite the ogre that they had seen it to be. Now, let me just say, in my relationship with both of them, they knew where I stood, but I didn't fall. I think you have to be very careful in my role, in the job that I was in, any head of the civil service. I was never interrogating any of them about their background or where they were coming from. I was accepting them as they were, as we met round the table. And I think it's very important to do that, because I didn't think I had the moral authority or the responsibility to start questioning, have you done this, have you changed, etc., etc.
You say they knew where you stood. Where do you stand?
Oh, unashamedly, since my teens, my faith has been part of my DNA.
And they would have known this?
They did. They knew it because of my background and the discussions we had. But, for example, I first met Martin. Can I just tell the story quickly about how I first met Martin McGuinness, because that leads to this. On the evening of my 25th wedding anniversary, which was November 1999, instead of Lorna and I being out at some nice restaurant somewhere, I was in Stormont when Jerry Adams stood up and said, "The Minister for Education is Martin McGuinness." And there was a gasp went round the assembly at the time, in shock and surprise. I hadn't met him, but he said, "I'll meet you tomorrow morning, 12 o'clock in Rathgale House." So at 11:45, I looked out, and the world's media and the world's press were outside Rathgale House in Bangor. And when the car came in, I went out. In fact, my two senior colleagues, Stephen Pulver and Tom Shaw, came with me. But the car came in, I came out, and as Martin got out of the car, I shook his hand. And someone said, "Hold that." And that was the photograph that you and your media colleagues thought important, right? It's not you personally, I mean you corporately. But that was in fact, our son got an email that night from a friend of his in San Francisco saying, "I see your dad has a new best friend." The important thing is, though, that Martin he said to me after that, he said, "The most important thing you ever did was you welcomed me publicly by shaking my hand." And I said to him, "Well, look, it's part of my DNA. This is Nigel Hamilton. I hope I would show you the grace and the courtesy that you're entitled to as a minister. But don't forget also, I had 400 people looking out the window thinking, what's he going to do now?" And that was an important part of leadership. So that became part of my life. And then on a Monday morning, we would have a conversation and he would say to me, "How was your weekend?" And I would say, "That was great, because Ulster won on Friday night," because we always did in those days, Pete. And we had a lovely time in church yesterday, just as a matter of fact. And some days we had a conversation beyond that, and other days we didn't. But that was just part of the natural discussion that we had. I wasn't forcing my views on him or anyone else, but just talking naturally about what we did over the weekend.
And did he talk naturally to you? Because
yes.
I understand he was a very devout Catholic.
Yes, he did. Because he said to me, "Yes, Derry City won on Sunday," because they used to in those days as well. And he said, "And I was at Mass on Sunday morning," which was great, because then we knew where one another stood. But he said to me many times in private, "The most important thing you did was shake my hand." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you were the establishment and I was the head of republicanism." And I just think, to be honest, can I say this, folk? Those small things are hugely important for us in sharing our faith. Whether it be shaking hands or talking naturally. I wasn't preaching, but I was doing what I thought as a Christian, as part of my DNA, that I should do.
So whenever you retired as the head of a civil service, was that it? Have you just been living a life in isolation
not at all.
A quiet life?
No, not at all. When I retired, I took up a number of... I became chairman of Bryson. I joined the board of the Ulster Bank, tried to help Richard Donnan solve some problems. I failed miserably. He succeeded. So I did seriously, I had some board appointments and some charitable things, and I became the president of Ulster Rugby, which was a great privilege too.
You're also currently the Vice Lord Lieutenant for Belfast.
That's right.
Now, Vice conjures up a word, conjures up a thought, but it's not that thought.
No. I might jokingly say there was no vice in Belfast until I was appointed. It's a privilege. The Lord Lieutenant in Belfast is the Queen's representative, and I'm the Vice Lord Lieutenant. It was Mary Peters appointed me in her time, and then Fionnuala J. O'Boy asked me to stay. So I represent the Queen at many events, when there are royal visits, when there are ships in here, with many services in St Anne's Cathedral, lots of things like that. In fact, I also was at a garden party not that long ago, where it was my responsibility to introduce the church leaders to a member of the royal family, and one of the church leaders asked me, "What is your job?" And I said, "Well, my job is to introduce the representatives of the King to the representative of the Queen."
I like that. And that takes us into the journey that has brought you to where you are. You were born into a family of faith.
Yes, I came from North Belfast. I was born, but sadly, my father died when he was 41 in 1965, which had major impact on my family. My mum, who was 96 last week, has been a widow all that time. But I pay her huge tribute, Paul, because my mum at that time, my mum and my dad were involved in parent-teacher associations, but also heavily involved in Crumlin Road Methodist Church, and then greatly encouraged me and my young sister at the time. After my dad died when I was 17, she was determined that my sister and I would go to university, and she took on menial jobs to make sure that we could do that. So I owe her a huge amount, not only to ensure that I got through university, but also in encouraging me in my faith.
When you were talking to her a few days ago, she suggested you get your hair cut. Being a good, dutiful son, did you?
She didn't suggest. She told me.
At your age?
At my age.
And you complied?
I did.
Listening to you, Nigel, Sir Nigel, listen to you, I get the impression at times that, life has been an eternal high for you. But I suspect nothing could be further from the truth.
No, it hasn't. It's been a privilege. I was really privileged to work my way up through the civil service in a number of departments. But over my life, there have been a number of major events. I, for example, was an 11+ pass whom the grammar schools in Belfast didn't want. Well, rejected me back at that time.
Hang on, why?
Postcode. We lived in a little 2-up, 2-down house.
Really?
In North Belfast. Yes.
Which is what Martin McGuinness was trying to do away with, because his last act as education minister was to scrap the 11+.
Yeah, I wasn't there at the time, but he did that. Yeah. That's right.
But look where we are now.
Yeah. Yes. The irony is that the schools, whom I won't name, subsequently, when I was permanent secretary in the Department of Education, invited me to be guest of honour at their prize givings. And then my father died. Then I went to Queen's. I had a lovely time at Queen's, and then through the civil service. But right then, two other things happened. One, some of you will remember, or may remember, that in a court case I was accused of perverting the course of justice, and was subject to a major review in London by a very senior QC. Now, at the end of the day, I was vindicated. But I tell you, at that time, Paul, you could question my judgment, you could question my application. If you question my integrity, you question the very heart of who I am. Because I just believe that integrity, to those of us who believe in faith, it has to be the very heart of what we do. Samuel Johnson said, integrity without knowledge is weak and useless, but knowledge without integrity is dangerous. I had that, and then in 2008, I had major bowel surgery, and 3 months after it, one of Keith Gardner's dear friends, effectively saved my life, because he said to me, the surgeon said to me, this was in the middle of my year as president of Ulster Rugby, if you hadn't have had surgery this year, by Christmas it would have been sinister. So, that's been an amazing experience for me and a journey, and yet something that I treasure, in the sense that now I have opportunity, like CBMC and various other folk, to share my faith, looking back on those experiences.
It also means you could have met God sooner.
But I'm very pleased to have put it off for a while.
That's the answer I was expecting.
Yeah.
Now, you brought a couple of props with you.
I did.
There was one particular we were having a look at outside, and you were very, very anxious to talk about Joseph's journey whenever he walked this earth.
Yeah. Just lest anyone thinks, as you asked me a few minutes ago, is life is it all plain sailing? Obviously, it's not plain sailing. And I just felt yesterday, when I was thinking about this, there may well be someone facing difficulties in business or home or whatever it was. And I actually prepared what I thought a little graph of the life of Joseph, right? Now, you can see it, right?
It looks not unlike the trajectory of Northern Ireland, up and down.
I'm not allowed to make political comment. But if you remember, Joseph, the good times, the bad times, in the pit, rescued from the pit, Potiphar's house, etc. When he interpreted the dream of the butler and the baker and thought, this is great, this is my way out of jail, it was 2 years before he was actually invited back in again. And here's a man of God asking, where's the straight line? There is no straight line in the situation. So, lest you're facing some of these things, the important thing is that, this is the ups and the downs. The important thing is that wherever we are, that God is with us and carrying us. I love the image of the footprints in the sand. I'm sure you've all heard that. At the end of a journey, the chap says to God, "You promised to be with me all through my life. When I look back and see the footprints in the sand, there are 2 sets, except in the most difficult times when there's 1 set. So you abandoned me." And God said, "No, my dear friend. Though when there's 1 set, that's when I was carrying you." I just feel it's very important that, as we go through the traumas of life, whatever they might be, that, we recognise that.
Enoch Powell, who was a committed Christian, famously said whenever he was sent into exile almost by Ted Heath, that being in exile is a good place to be, because you're on your own, you're there, there's nobody near you. You do feel isolated. And I'm just wondering, did there come a time, or have there been times in your own life whenever, despite the fact that you have faith, you have felt alone, you have felt not abandoned, but certainly detached, and maybe in exile?
Yes, of course there are. And it would be wrong to claim that it's anything otherwise. But at the end of the day, one of my dear friends was Derek Bingham, known to many of you, who introduced me to a lovely song called "There Is Hope." And I'd just like to read the second verse of this. It's written by Stuart Townend. "There is a hope that lifts my weary head, a consolation strong against despair, that when the world has plunged me in its deepest pit, I find the Saviour there. Through present sufferings, future's fear, he whispers courage in my ear. For I am safe in everlasting arms, and they will lead me home."
Yeah, well, hold on a minute. That's all very well to say.
Yeah.
But you can believe that in the best of times. But what about believing that in the worst of times?
Well, that's been my experience in the worst of times. There's nothing, I'd have to say to you, there's nothing more concerning than having your photograph on the front page of the Belfast Telegraph when you're the head of the civil service and said, "Accused of perverting the course of justice." That's you can't be any deeper than that. And yet, at that time, and I don't want to be emotional, but I'm quite serious about this. Another experience at that time was that when I struggled at that time, But I came home one day, and my son Gavin, we have two boys and two lovely daughters-in-law, one of whom is here today. Gavin actually, in our kitchen, had pinned these on the walls. These are the actual things, right? Don't quit in hard times, pray all the harder, Romans 12. 1 Corinthians, no test or temptation that comes your way is beyond that God will never let you down. 2 Corinthians, these hard times are small potatoes compared to the good times. Psalm 91, I'll get you out of any trouble. I give you the best of care. Call on me, right? Or Nahum. When was the last time we ever heard a sermon from Nahum? God is good, a hiding place in tough times. That was my experience.
How did you feel when you saw that from your son?
Wow. What a humbling experience just to see that from my son. And
did you cry?
Yes, I did. Yes, I shed tears.
Did he see you?
No, he didn't, but I told him.
No, I wasn't asking that to be smart. I was serious because, our humanity is what unites all of us in a situation like this.
And I have this most wonderful family in terms of my wife. I would say that, nothing I ever did in my life I did without Lorna's experience, because particularly when you're in the civil service and the other things that I was doing, Lorna looked after the boys at home at the time, and now we are privileged to have two lovely daughters-in-law, 4 grandchildren, and a wonderful blessing, at my age in life, when I'm sure others are the same in terms of glorifying in grandchildren. I went to Dublin on Saturday with our 13-year-old Kate's son Ben, and he and I had a great day. We just went off to Dublin to see apart from the game. But that was just a lovely experience.
Talking about that now, we're due to leave the European Union on Friday, the 29th of March at 11 p.m. Right. On the following day, Ulster are playing Leinster at the Aviva Stadium in Dublin. And I'm just wondering, what travel documents do the Ulster supporters need to bring with them, do you think, on that day?
Well, to be honest, I'm very disappointed that on The View last night, you didn't ask that question to your...
Well, guess what? Guess what? I wanted to ask Ken Reid, and I told him I was going to ask him, but we ran out of time. Sorry, we live by the second in our job.
Let me tell you this. There are 12,500 Ulster supporters going to the game that day, and we will get to the Aviva come what may.
Yeah, but you may not get back home.
If we win, it doesn't matter.
Now, I'm mindful that everybody here has, taken time out of a busy schedule, and I appreciate the fact that you have done that. And either you've been listening intently or we've put you back to sleep. But I like to think it was the former rather than the latter. And I want to give you an opportunity, Nigel, to leave us with a thought or two before I ask you the killer question.
Okay. Can I just say that to me, in all that I ever sought to do in public service, in the civil service, I always thought it hugely important to make sure, the first thing I would say, Paul, is that we show kingdom values in all that we do. I don't think I ever preached to folk. I think one needs, in a situation that I was in, you have to respect others' beliefs, etc. But I think those kingdom values are hugely important, of integrity and of respect for one another. I heard a wonderful quotation from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs many years ago when at a Holocaust commemoration in Belfast, and he said, never forget that people who are not like us are people like us. I thought it's a very important kingdom value. I also think, and can I just say this to you, especially you in business, I believe the ministry of encouragement is hugely important. Jose Mourinho got it all wrong. You don't criticise players and folk. The art of criticism is gone. It's the Barnabas approach. If with pleasure you are viewing anything a man or a woman is doing, if you like them or you love them, tell them now. Don't withhold your approbation till the parson makes oration and they live with snow white lilies on their brow. For no matter how you shout it, they won't really care about it. They won't know how many teardrops you have shed. If you think some praise is due them, now's the time to give it to them, because they cannot read their tombstone when they're dead. it's encouragement, and it's also listening. You know, when I go to rugby matches, I always buy this for a tenner. I'm an anorak. I like to hear what the referee says, right? So on Saturday, I like to hear what Jerome Garcia was saying. There's only one problem. He couldn't hear one thing that I was saying. But isn't that important in our business life? If you don't listen, you won't know what's going on in your business. And in our Christian life, to hear what God is saying to us. So often we want to talk. You know. So it's those kingdom values. But my final point is just perhaps a vision that I would leave you of Portchurch Strand. If you could sit overlooking Portchurch Strand on the seat that my dear friend Derek Bingham and I sat on many times, and you watch the waves coming. They come and they come and they come. Nothing man can do can stop the waves coming. And that's like the love of God. It comes and it comes and it comes. And as Yancey said, nothing we can do can make God love us any more, or nothing we can do can make God love us any less. Right? And if you look in the sand, and if you write in the wet sand, sins, and the waves come and wash them away, they've gone. Even Poirot couldn't find them. So it's the love of God. It's the fact that God carries us, and it's the fact that through His love, we as Christians can have our sins washed. I know that's an old-fashioned expression, but that's the reality of our lives.
And finally, the Prime Minister is here today. She has a mountain to climb, doesn't she?
She has a mountain to climb in Brexit, and we have a mountain to climb politically in Northern Ireland. Somehow or other, I think there will be some deal cobbled together, because politically there's always we always scrape out of it. In terms of Northern Ireland, these two parties, or my experience, are miles and miles apart. And I think three things need to be done before we get devolution back again. And the first is we need to sort out the institutional things, because the system was wrong, it wasn't going to work. But secondly, I think we need to sort out the values of the politics. If RHI inquiry showed us anything, it was that the value base was all wrong in terms of honesty and integrity and respect for one another. And that's before you get to political issues. But if we believe that God, if we believe Romans 13, that God is in everything in terms of authority, etc., then I think we need to leave optimistically in expectation rather than pessimistically in the pit.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Nigel Hamilton.